I have to turn the conversation towards relatively modern history, which is Libya, Egypt, Syria. These three. This is around 2010,
Yeah.
right? In that
Yeah,
period.
yeah.
Would you even club them together? Syria, Egypt, Libya.
No.
Very different
I mean, even though
problem.
Libya and Egypt share a border, they're very different, right? Uh, Gaddafi came about from a lot of impulses, this Arab nationalism and things like that, that made Nasser the dictator of Egypt. And then, Nasser's successors continue to rule. It's still a military dictatorship in that sense, right? Libya is more of a tribal dictatorship. I mean, military, sure, but tribal. And Libya is actually three countries combined into one. There's when it was an Italian colony, it used to be called Tripolitana and Cyrenaica. Cyrenaica is where Benghazi is today, which is there's the bay in between. The right side is Cyrenaica, the left side is Tripolitana, Tripoli. And the south is the Berber areas, the Amazigh areas, right? That's the desert. Now, they've never really been united because they've always been a tribal confederacy. Under Gaddafi, it was very rich. The problem, of course, is like Saddam Hussein, the fellow didn't know where to use his oil wealth, used it for all kinds of, uh, you know, terrorism in Egypt, terrorism against Israel, terrorism in his southern border, terrorism in his western border, constantly trying to invade his neighbors one way or another. Ultimately, it all came down. I mean, he tried the Lockerbie bombing. He bombed a American Pan Am airliner, which then led to sanctions. The sanctions were lifted. But then, he was trying to build nuclear stuff. He gave that up as well. He tried suppressing his people again, and then, boom, finished. Killed, tortured and killed by his own people. Brought down by sleight of hand, because the resolution was for a ceasefire. The West said, well, you can't have a ceasefire when there's a dictator in power, so they went and bombed him and destroyed his military. And now it's a full raging tribal civil war happening out there, even now. So similar to Iraq, but very different from Iraq. Much, much more tribal. Not as separatist as, say, they have an identity of being Libyan. Unlike, say, Iraqis, where they are Sunni first, Shia first, and Kurdish first. The Kurds, of course, never want to be part of Iraq. The Sunnis want Iraq and to be the oppressors in the system. And the Shias also want a unified Iraq, and they want to be the oppressors in the system, right? So it's very different dynamics all over. And that's Libya. I've never found Libya to be a particularly fascinating country because it's low population, very linear sort of explainable circumstances. It didn't even really have a proper whack job of not an interesting dictator, except that he had female bodyguards.
Why? Gimmicky.
He also likes these weird things. He pretended to be a Bedouin living in the desert. So he had palaces and things, but he always used to live in tents that he used to set up outside the palace. Yeah. So,
Why did those revolutions happen at around the same time?
very good. Demographics. Most of the Arab world had a huge youth bulge and no equivalent economic opportunity for them. They all went through sanctions and international isolation. Now, when you've got a huge youth population, no economic opportunity or limited economic opportunity, you're sitting on a time bomb. Now, Syria was slightly similar but different. So, Egypt, Tunisia, it started in Tunisia, in fact, where there was a fruit seller who was killed. His cart was toppled and he was killed, and that's what started off the entire Arab Spring thing. But none of these dictators are really, if there is a caste system of dictators, I would say Mao Zedong, Stalin on top, then Hitler, Mussolini, then the North Koreans and the Turkmens, and the Syrians, Egyptians, and Libyans are like very low, bro. They're like,
Based on what?
they're not crazy enough. They're not closed enough. They're much more open to their neighbors and things. A lot of Arab countries, you can just take your car and drive across the border to another Arab country. It's fairly easy. They're not so strict about visas and things like that. So it's nowhere, the isolation is nowhere near Turkmenistan or North Korea in that sense. And remember, the USSR and China were even worse than North Korea or Turkmenistan when they were in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and things like that. So Egypt is the most tame of the lot. But Egypt is a very interesting thing because most of global jihad actually starts off from Egypt. So these guys called Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb, who come up with the ideas of modern jihad. And you have this sort of so-called secular military, Nasser in Egypt's case, who cracks down on them very, very hard, makes them, well, Hassan al-Banna died way before Sayyid Qutb. Sayyid Qutb literally died in Nasser's jail while his genitals were being bitten by German shepherds and things like that. Because, dogs have a connotation of dirt and filth in Islam. So it was a way of terrorizing a pious Muslim man, and they would unleash the dogs to bite him in all his places. And he ultimately died in jail from prolonged torture. And a lot of the jihadist philosophies that you see today are because of Sayyid Qutb and what is the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan, which spreads. It spreads all over. And progressively, the dictators become less wacky. I mean, look, we've discussed what wacky is, right? They're not really, they're actually quite sane people. It's just that they appear wacky to us because we look at it from a very different perspective. So Nasser dies because he keeps failing to defeat Israel. He dies of shame, essentially. He loses the 67 war, which he initially started off claiming it was a great success. We've destroyed the Israelis. It turns out the bloody Israelis captured the entire Sinai, which is 3 times their own size of their own country. He can't deal with the shame and he dies within a year. He's followed by Sadat, who starts another war with Israel, gets defeated but makes peace with Israel. But he's the first Arab to make peace with Israel. So the same Muslim Brotherhood that Nasser was killing turns on him and kills him because you made peace with the great enemy. And that's followed by Hosni Mubarak, who is, I think he's the only other Air Force general who also became, yes, I think he was an Air Force general. So Syria and Egypt both had Air Force generals as dictators, who's just corrupt, incompetent, and when this Arab Spring happens, he gets overthrown. Why? Because you have a huge youth bulge and not enough jobs. Everything is corrupt. Everything's owned by the military. Generals rule everything. What happens, happens. But then the military gets its revenge. They get rid of them and come back. Syria is the most interesting of the lot. And it's a fast. I love Syria. Syria is traditionally, if you look at the Arab world, when you read all these 1001 Arabian Nights and things like that, it all happens in Damascus, Aleppo, and Baghdad. Why? Because these have always been the 3 centers of power of Arab rule. Aleppo, Damascus, Baghdad in Iraq. Now, Baghdad is part of Iraq now, but Aleppo and Damascus, same country, they have always been rivals for power. Now, what happens in 2011 is there's a huge drought that hits the north. Aleppo is bigger than Damascus. It's richer than Damascus, but it's not the capital. A drought hits the north. Massive migration happens from north to south. So in addition to having a huge youth bulge, without jobs, you're now facing a drought which has destroyed your farming land and what little employment was available out there. So massive internal displacement to the south, which is where the entire Syrian civil war starts. It's destroyed the fabric of that society. It is not a functional society anymore. You think the press wants to tell you the civil war is over. It's not. It's a new phase in the civil war. It is a fractured society. There are too many competing terrorist groups out there of all kinds. It's going to erupt at any time again.